My friends and I have a Snapchat group together, which means when someone sends a picture to the group, everyone gets the picture. There's 5 of us in the group: me, Marvin, Glenn, Joe and Jared. One day at school, Jared told me he lost his phone and didn't have Find My iPhone on, which sucked for him. But, well, what could we really do about it? The rest of us continued about our daily lives. I was at the gas station and saw a funny looking guy who looked like he didn't know how to use a gas pump. So I thought it'd be funny to sneak a quick video of him and sent it to the Snap group that I had with my friends. I got home and checked Snapchat and saw the Snap was opened. I checked which of my friends opened it and was kind of surprised to see Jared's name under the opened list. I texted to Jared asking if he found his phone, but the text never said delivered. I asked all my other friends if they had spoken to Jared about his phone. Joe said he was hanging out with Jared. As we spoke, he also said Jared did not find his phone. He put Jared on the phone for me and told me to come over. When I got to Joe's house, he and Jared had already thought to look at the Snap map to see that the location had not been turned off, and it said whoever was using Jared's phone last opened it 4 minutes ago. Its location was an abandoned construction ground. Ready to go kick some ass, or at least thinking we were, we agreed to drive down to the construction site. Getting there was quick and easy, but hopping the fence and navigating in the dark was a different story. According to the Snap map, Jared's iPhone was somewhere in a big abandoned building in front of us. The 3 of us, all above 6 foot, definitely felt we could get the better of anyone in a fight. But what was this person doing in this building at this hour? The situation was just too unsettling. We found a big hole in the wall where we could enter the building. It was cold and empty in there. Besides the rubble and graffiti, everywhere and every little sound created an echo. The last time Snapchat updated Jared's location was 5 minutes ago, but the location was right on top of us. It didn't seem like anyone or anything was on the first floor, so we went to the second floor. We found ourselves in a big empty room. Joe checked the location of Jared's phone one more time, and it appeared that all 3 of our phones were in the same exact location, which was weird. Where could his phone be? The sound of a digital camera shutter accompanied with a blindingly bright flash coming from an adjacent room made the 3 of us freeze like a deer in headlights. Then Jared was the first one to run for it, screaming. Joe and I followed soon, running back down the stairs and out of the hole to the outside. We got to the car and drove back to Joe's house. On the way back, Joe and I got a Snapchat from Jared's phone. I was the first one to open it, and it was a picture of 3 of us standing in that room with the caption, "Run." We never went back to that building for his phone. In fact, after that, the location on Jared's phone was turned off, until of course, Jared signed in on a different phone. As a kid, I had a bedroom on the first floor. Money was a little tight, and our mom was taking care of 4 kids. I was the youngest, so I had the little room. My room was next to the living room, a small square room with wood flooring. There was one vent in this room, near the floor, and also one more vent in the ceiling. My bed took up half the room. Like I said, it was a very small room. I'll keep it short and straight to the point. I was 13 years old doing my homework on my bed, since I didn't have a desk in my room. That's when I heard a child's laughter. I went outside my room to look around the living room and kitchen for any of my siblings. Everyone seemed to be upstairs though. Usually in these kind of stories, you hear people say they just chalk these kind of things up to their imagination. But that's stupid. I definitely heard that laughter. There's no way I imagined something so clear. I continued my homework with one ear perked up listening for any other suspicious sounds. Eventually, enough time passed that I was able to move past it. In fact, it seems it was just about when I was able to get over it, I heard it again. Child's laughter. more so giggling. I should say this time it went on longer. It wasn't coming from outside my room. It was somewhere in the room. I figured one of my brothers were hiding from me. I followed the sound of the laughter, strangely, to the corner of my room, and I looked down at the vent. It was coming from inside the vent. I got down on my knees and pressed my ear up to the vent. There was no more giggling at this point though. When there was a silence for a few seconds, I lifted my ear from the vent and put my eyes up to the vent to get a peek inside. It took me a second to realize I was staring at a pair of eyes looking back up at me. I shrieked like a girl and screamed for my mom. She came storming into my room moments later, but of course the noises were gone, as were the eyes. My mom thought I was going crazy due to a lack of sleep, but I refused to sleep in that room. So she let me sleep in her room that night. That went on for a week, actually, before she put her foot down. I spent the next 4 years in that same bedroom before we moved. Nothing paranormal ever happened to me since that one particular night.
The year I turned 13, my friend invited me and 2 other friends to stay at his house on Halloween night. He had a fairly large house outside of our town, and it was the perfect place to go trick-or-treating. We decided it would be cool to go now to get sweets for a movie. So fast forward, we were near the end of our trick-or-treating, and at one house, a woman answered the door. She was tall and skinny with shoulder-length hair. Her house was disgusting. We could smell the odor of cigarettes from inside. She was quick to tell us that there were no more sweets left. However, she could go try to find something for us. After a couple minutes of waiting, she comes back with an old brown paper bag with old-looking candy inside. We kindly deny the bag and tell her we're getting picked up, so we better go. She grabs one of my friends and says, "No, please," but my friend pulls away from her, and then she quickly shuts the door. We knocked on a few more houses before hearing something going on near the parking lot of the housing complex. Someone exclaimed, "They took my child, they took her, they took her." It was her, that woman, and that was my friend's parents' car that she was banging on. She was throwing herself at the car and hitting it with her fists. A couple of neighbors came out due to the commotion. They seemed to know who she was. They apologized to us and said it was a big misunderstanding. We quickly got into the car, and my friend's mom started driving us out. But we don't get far before the woman jumps in front of the car, claiming one of us was her child. The neighbors once again pulled her away. It was later that night, however, when things truly began. We stayed up late like any teenagers do at sleepovers, and we watched some scary movies. Out of nowhere, the light turned on in the hall. We could see it under the closed door of the bedroom. We assumed it was my friend's parents who were about to come in to tell us to get some sleep. However, no one came in. I decided to have a peep out the door. Nothing at all. My friends joined me to see why the lights suddenly turned on. Out of nowhere, my friend says, "It's her." And through a large window facing the backyard, we see that woman standing there, looking in. However, the second she saw us stare at her, she ran away. Disturbed by this, we came back inside the bedroom and locked the door. We were obviously quite shaken up by this. Who is she? What does she want? We sat around for an hour, nervous, on high alert. However, we eventually did somehow manage to fall asleep. That morning, my friend's mom told us the situation at the housing complex shook her up so much that she thought she had seen that woman standing over her bed in the middle of the night. My friends and I never even told her we saw that woman at the house that night, which led us to wonder, what if, just maybe what if, that woman actually was inside the house that night?
I was 22 years old, attending a Halloween party at my former best friend Nick's house, who died of a heroin overdose in 2013. Before his death, he would throw big Halloween parties every year at his house, as his parents routinely flew to New York every year to attend their own friend's party. He was always a big Halloween freak, so the whole house was littered with truly horrifying props that we all knew Nick spent way too much money on. He even put up giant walls of cardboard and covered them with wallpapers to create a haunted maze of sorts. I want to keep this story PG-13 rated, so I'll skip the weed, beer, LSD, and sex and get right to the part where things got bad. I'll admit, we weren't in our right minds. None of us were. Anyone who came to Nick's parties knew what went down. Me, Nick, and a few other guys, Vinny G, Joey, and Q, were upstairs in Nick's room smoking a bong when we heard two steady, loud bangs come from downstairs. Nick clumsily but panickingly rushed to open the door and see what was going on. There were sounds of screaming of both guys and girls. I remember quite clearly it sounded as if there were a crowd of people screaming for their lives down there. We all called Nick to come back in and shut the door. Even under the influence of drugs, we all knew what was going on. Nick ran back inside and shut the door quickly but also quietly, locking it behind him. He turned to us and had on the facial expression of someone who had just witnessed murder. "What did you see? What's going on?" we all shouted at him. He told us to hide before anything else. We all knew why. From that point on, we didn't ask questions. Nick hid the lights and hid in the closet with Joey, while I hid under the bed with Q, and Vinny G hid in the storage box. We could hear the blasting music from downstairs turn off, followed by a grown man screaming at everyone to shut up. One unfortunate girl let out a scream of shock and fear, and after another bang, silence. The man started shouting at everyone again, but personally I couldn't hear it too well, and I certainly as hell wouldn't remember exactly what he was shouting. We heard two other men shouting. By now there were a confirmed 3 intruders in the house, but there could have been more for all we knew at that point. We heard the sound of boots stomping up the stairs and then coming halfway down the hall and stopping outside the bedroom door. The intruder on the other side of the door tried the doorknob, but when he realized it was locked, he started ramming into the door with most likely his shoulder. After a few failed attempts at that, the sound of a few shots to the doorknob were clearly enough to break the lock, allowing the door to swing open. We heard cries from downstairs after the shots to the doorknob, followed by a silencing gunshot. I watched through the transparent cloth that hung from the bottom of Nick's bed as the black boots with overlapping ripping denim jeans moved instinctively to the closet. He opened the door. I could hear Nick begging for the intruder not to kill him, offering a generous amount of money if they would leave. Nick gave himself up as the house owner. That's when the intruder ordered him downstairs. The rest of us stayed put. Apparently Joey hadn't been caught with Nick. We stayed under the bed, shaking and afraid. There was near silence from downstairs, other than Nick talking with the intruders, but whatever they were saying was much too low for us to hear. It felt like a near 20 minutes before the front door slammed shut and Nick came running back upstairs to tell us that they were gone. I think the most horrifying moment of my life was when I stepped downstairs back into the living room and saw the 2 dead bodies laying lifelessly on the ground, holes in their heads spewing out blood. Jen and Robbie, 2 good friends that I still miss. I'll spare you the details of what happened when the police arrived, but despite the fact that the house smelled like a marijuana greenhouse, the police were more interested in finding out who the masked men were that killed 2 innocent college students. Oh yeah, Nicky told the 4 of us who were hiding in his room that there were 4 intruders in total, all wearing fedoras, masks, coats, and gloves. They demanded $100,000 in cash, and when Nick could not provide it, they demanded he fill their empty sack with his most valued possessions. All of the partygoers held hostage in the room were also forced to throw their wallets into the sack or they would be shot. After the incident, Nick became depressed. He started drinking too much, becoming an alcoholic. He stopped showing up to school and ultimately ended up dropping out. He started the use of heavier drugs, such as meth and heroin. I had one good talk with him since the incident, and he was more real during this talk than he had ever been. He told me, with tears rolling down his cheeks, he lived in constant pain, knowing he caused the death of 2 of his best friends. Nick died of a heroin overdose in July of 2013, not even a year after the incident.
I can tell you from personal experience that trying a Ouija board is a huge mistake. It was the summer of 2013. My friends had a vintage Ouija board that was allegedly worth a decent amount of money. My friend agreed to trade it with me for a video game that I never played, so I happily made the trade. I tried using it alone, but it proved to be just a scam. I didn't really expect it to work. I mainly got it just for the money to be made off of it. I threw the stupid thing on the floor of my living room and forgot about it. Everything was going normal until the next morning. I woke up and found that the two plants I had sitting on my coffee table had been knocked over and the Ouija board was sitting on the table. I didn't remember putting it there, nor did I understand how the plants could have fallen over. Wind was definitely not an answer. I wondered if it was possible that I had sleepwalks, or maybe I was half awake and walked down to get a glass of water and bumped into them or something. I moved everything back in place, but the carpet already had dirt stains on it. I brought the Ouija board box up to my room and tossed it on the floor. Things got bad that night while laying awake in the dark. I was disturbed by the sound of a muffled click. I looked up, not sure what it was, and then I saw through the cracks of my closet door that my closet light was on. I had no idea how it could have turned on, but I got up and opened the closet door. Anyway, there was nobody in there, but that hadn't even crossed my mind. I turned the lights off and jumped back into my bed. Probably 10 minutes later, I heard the same clicking sound. Naturally, I looked to the closet and felt my heart sink a little. The closet light was on again. A mix of confusion and fear started building up inside of me. I once again turned off the light and cautiously got back in my bed. I found myself waiting for the closet light to click on again. But what happened instead was much worse. Instead of the closet light turning on, the whole room was suddenly filled with light, as I heard the main light switch flicking. I had seen enough and was out of the door within seconds. I quickly pieced things together and threw that old Ouija board in the closest dumpster. Nothing weird ever happened after that. In Korea, when a patient is taken to hospital, a white wristband is placed on their left arm. These wristbands contain the patient's name and information. When a patient dies, a red wristband is placed on their right arm and they are taken to the morgue. In one particular hospital in Korea, a young doctor was working the night shift. It was around 2 a.m. when he finished his last operation. He was on the 5th floor and pressed the button for the elevator. The doctor was tired after a long day and was looking forward to the end of his shift. At 2 a.m., the hospital was very quiet. Most of the patients were asleep and many of the nurses had already gone home. He entered the elevator and there was just one other person there. He casually chatted with the woman while the elevator descended. "Hi, what are you doing here at this hour of the day? From what I see, you don't look like a patient. Have you come here to meet any patient?" "Yes, I've come here to take care of my dad. He's admitted here. He met with an accident yesterday," said the woman to the doctor. Then the doctor said, "Okay, take care. But what are you up to at this time?" "I wasn't getting sleep in the ward, so I thought I'll take a walk downstairs." The elevator stopped at the basement and the door opened. They saw an old man dressed in a white gown standing there. The old man was about to get in when the doctor suddenly slammed the close button and punched the button for the 5th floor. "Why did you do that?" asked the astonished woman. "I've performed a lot of operations," replied the doctor. "I've seen a lot of people die. When a patient dies, they get a red wristband placed on their arm." The woman was silent. "You saw it, didn't you?" said the doctor. That old man had a red wristband on his arm." "A red wristband?" said the woman as she raised her right arm. "You mean like this one?" I made the mistake of searching the deep web one time. I saw and read that some people are talking about this thing called Tor that allows you to search the deep web and it was basically post asking for the strangest things people have come across on the deep web. It intrigued me, some of the things people have found. So I went along and downloaded Tor. Someone on Reddit posted a link to a basically hidden wiki with a bunch of useful links to the dark web. I was shocked at how many child pornography links there were. I did my best to steer clear of anything like that. I did come across a link that took me to another page with a bunch of links called the Black Pages. The page was black with a bunch of red and yellow links. The red pages seemed to be the strangest. There was one link called Personal Assassin and another called Dead Pets. Reading some of those links, I realized how messed up this whole deep web thing really was. I clicked the yellow link and ended up at yet another page full of links. There I found something that seemed interesting. It was called the Secret Society Chat. I clicked on the link and it took even longer than all other pages took to load. I'd say I stared at a blank white screen for a good minute before the page finally turned black and the chat box popped up. Next to the chat box was a black video screen. I wished that I just clicked the back button at that point, but instead, I typed "Hey" in the chat box. What happened next was weird. Someone wearing a mask sitting in a dark room popped up on the screen. I felt like my heart stopped when I saw my face pop up on the screen as well. The website was using my webcam, even though I naturally keep it off. I covered it with my thumb and tried to close the page, but at this point my taskbar was gone, along with the minimize and exit buttons at the top of the Tor window. I tried hitting the Ctrl-Alt-Delete, but it did nothing. And then there was a muffled, distorted voice coming from my speakers. I could only assume it was the guy in the mask speaking. He was masking his voice with some kind of voice changer. I clearly remember he said, "I still see you, James." My heart sank. He had said my name. I began holding the power button on my laptop, and it felt like an eternity before it finally cut power. I didn't know if I should report what happened to the police, but from what I knew, everything was anonymous with Tor, so it didn't even seem worth it. It was obviously just a low-life hacker. I went on with my life after deleting the Tor browser from my computer, but about 2 weeks later, my mom threw a letter in my room. She told it came in the mail for me. There was no return address on it. I ripped the letter open and unfolded the paper. Tucked inside in huge letters that filled the paper were the 3 words, "Don't come back." I felt like I was going to throw up from the sickening feeling it gave me. I crumpled the paper and threw it away. I didn't call the cops as it seems pointless, and I didn't tell my mom because it would only cause her to panic. But I have no idea how or why they got my address. It was a weekend night in the November of 2015. My 7-year-old son Sean was having a sleepover with 4 of his friends. At that time, my wife wasn't home for whatever reason, so I had to keep a somewhat close watch on them without making it too obvious. They were all in Sean's room making a lot of noise, and when things would either get too quiet or too loud, I would sneak in over to the bedroom door and just listen to what was going on. You may think that's weird, but this was my wife's instructions, and any married man knows you never want to go against what your wife tells you to do. When it was getting a little loud, I went over to the door and heard that they were all just simply playing with Legos and other toys very loudly. So I went back to the living room to watch TV. Eventually, I heard weird thumping type noises coming from my son's room. I muted the TV and could distinguish them to be taps on one of the windows. I figured let them have their fun as long as they are not breaking anything. I unmuted the TV. However, I quickly realized that things went completely silent from down the hall in my son's room. Now I was nervous that they might have broken something because it was very uncommon for them to all be completely silent for so long. So I once again crept over to Sean's bedroom door and listened. I could hear quiet giggling and whispering in the room. I finally opened the door out of curiosity and saw the 4 boys sitting on the rug with a mess of toys scattered all over the place. I noticed that the window was completely open. I told Sean to keep it shut,
and to also keep the noise down a little bit. Before shutting the door, I made a stop into the bathroom before planning to go back to the living room. However, when I was in the bathroom, I noticed through the corner of my eye a black shadow passing the window outside. I ran back to my son's room and told 4 boys not to go outside. Then that's when it hit me. There were only 4 boys in the room as opposed to 5. Tom was missing. In a panic, I yelled at Sean to tell me where he was, and they all pointed to the open window. Sean said that he left with the pirate to go find the treasure. In that moment, I felt a mixture of feelings in my stomach, but mostly like it was about to explode. I wouldn't be able to fit through that window, so I ran out the front door and caught view of a man holding Tom's hand and walking towards the car. I yelled at him to stop. They both turned around, and then the man let go of Tom, hopped into the tan-colored Toyota Corolla, and floated down the streets. I ran to grab Tom and brought him back inside. I was no longer comfortable with this sleepover and called all the parents, told them what happened, and suggested they all come and pick up their kids, which is exactly what they did. I received a bit of criticism from Tom's parents at first, but they ultimately thanked me, and their son is still good friends with my son. The boys all said that a random guy came to Sean's window, knocked on it, lifted it open himself, and talked in a pirate voice, asking one of the kids to come with him to find the treasure. The fact that this happened in the assumed safety of my own house and that it actually worked is what disturbs me the most.
There was a woman named Suzanne who lived in an old house on a cliff overlooking the sea. She was divorced from her husband. Suzanne had been deeply depressed ever since her son Bobby drowned. She was devastated by the loss and felt like she couldn't go on. As time went by, Suzanne began reading books about black magic and Satanism. The more she read, the more she became immersed in the world of the occult. It was like an addiction. She came across a spell that was supposed to be able to resurrect the dead.
It was Halloween night.
She drew a pentagram on her floor of her living room. Lighting some black candles, she stood in the middle of the pentagram, and at the stroke of midnight, she read aloud from an ancient satanic book. "Come, fulfill my desire, and do my bidding in accordance with my will. I conjure thee in the name of Satan, to whom all evil is obedient, by which name the earth is overthrown, the seas turn black, the ground shudders, fire is quenched, and all host of things in heaven and hell do tremble. Lucifer, prince of darkness, return my son who drowned by accident. Return him to me now. I command thee." Afterwards, Suzanne blew out the candles. She collapsed to her knees and began to weep. All of a sudden, she heard a faint scratching on her front door. Cautiously, she walked over to the door and listened. The scratching grew louder. "Who's there?" she cried. There was a long silence, and then she heard a voice whisper, "Mommy?" Suzanne opened the door and was shocked to see a small boy crouched on the doorstep. He was soaking wet and shivering with cold. "Bobby," she cried. "It's you! It's really you!" She hurriedly brought him inside and put a towel around him, trying to warm him up. His teeth were chattering and his hands were shaking. "I was so lonely and desolate without you, Bobby," she said. "Where were you? What happened?" "I remember water," he said. "Cool water. And I couldn't breathe. I woke up and couldn't remember who I was. I walked and walked in the rain. These people found me and they took me in. I didn't know if I was alive or dead." "You're alive, Bobby," she cried. "You're really alive." "Was I a good boy, Mommy?" Bobby asked. "Of course you were a good boy," she replied. "Did you love me, Mommy?" Bobby asked. "I do love you," she replied, "from the bottom of my heart." "Were you nice to me, Mommy?" Bobby asked. "Of course I was," she said. Bobby stared at her. It was a mean, angry stare, and there was a spiteful sneer on his face. It frightened Suzanne. "I want to play a game with you, Mommy," he cried. "Hide and seek." All of a sudden he raced up the stairs. All of the lights in the house went out. "Bobby, what are you doing?" she cried. "Where are you?" There was no answer.
Bobby, stop this. I want you to come back right here. Bobby, please don't do this to Mommy. For the last time, what are you doing?
Just then she heard the boy's voice coming from the darkness. "Aren't you glad the lights are out, Mommy?" he said. "It makes the game more fun." "You're going to hurt yourself in the dark," Suzanne replied. Suzanne cautiously walked up the stairs, feeling her way in the darkness. "Bobby, stop this," she shouted. "You're making Mommy very angry." All of a sudden, the door burst open and Bobby was standing there, cackling like a maniac. In his hand, he held a long, sharp kitchen knife. "Let's play hide and seek now, Mommy," he shrieked. Suzanne recoiled in horror. Backing away, she tripped and went tumbling down the stairs. When she landed at the bottom, she looked up and saw her son coming down the stairs with the knife raised above his head. "You lied, Mommy," he said. "Bobby didn't really drown by accident. You know that. Bobby drowned himself. He couldn't stand the way you treated him, and he killed himself just to get away from you. Don't you see? Bobby didn't want to come back, Mommy. No, Bobby hates you, Mommy. He didn't want to come back, so he sent me instead." Just then, there was a flash of lightning and it lit up the house. For one terrible moment, Suzanne saw the face of the thing that had come back instead of Bobby. It was 2011. I had to sell my old bicycle since I had recently got a new one. It wasn't a piece of junk, so I figured I could get a couple of $100 for it. I had never used Craigslist before, so I had to have my son show me how to use it. He basically put the whole ad together for me and showed me how to actually post it. He listed my phone number so that anyone who was interested could call or text me. The ad was up for a few days with no bites, and I was becoming impatient. I think after 3 days, I finally got a text from someone late in the day showing interest in coming to buy the bike. He got right down to it actually in his first text, saying he wanted to come get the bike as soon as possible. I told him he could come right now and included my address. He said he'd be over within half an hour. I was happy to potentially be getting this bike off my mind finally. I was actually home alone. I don't fully remember what my family was doing. I think my wife and younger son had to go out shopping, while my older son just went out with his friends. But you get the point. I was alone. I was sitting in my living room watching TV. It was dark out by now when I heard a car pull up in front of the house. I looked out of the window, watched as 3 grown men got out of the car. Right off the bat, that screamed overkill. Why would anyone need to take along 2 other people to check out a bicycle? One of them rang the bell. They had to have seen me standing by the window, so they knew I was there. So I opened the door, and the man standing in front of the other 2 reached out and shook my hands. His name was Jeffrey, or at least that's what he claims. He was a big dude. You wouldn't have to look at him twice to know he lifted weights. He also had a really thick beard and deep voice. He didn't introduce his 2 friends though, who were just standing behind him looking at me with blank expressions. They weren't exactly tiny men either. As I was mid-sentence telling them let's go around back, Jeffrey cut past me and into my house, saying, "Which way to the bike?" His 2 friends followed. The idea of making sure that they didn't enter my house was clearly out of the window, so I rushed in front of them and led them down the half stairs to the back door. Jeffrey and one of his friends came out back with me while his 3rd friend asked me where the restroom was. I paused for the longest time. How was I about to let this random guy go use my bathroom while I was out here with his 2 friends? But as I looked at his 2 friends who were staring at me, I submissively gave him directions to my bathroom. As that man disappeared into my house, I went to the shed to grab the bicycle. On my walk to and from the shed fetching the bike, all I was thinking was, what did I just get myself into? So I showed Jeffrey the bike. He started analyzing every little detail of the bike, like things no one should ever think to analyze on a bike. For example, some of the spokes may have been slightly bent, or the reflector had scuff marks on it. I was so busy answering his questions and trying to defend the condition of the bike from his remarks that I didn't even think of the man who had supposedly been in my bathroom for almost 10 minutes. I told the two of them to keep checking out the bike. I'd be right back to fetch something. I went inside and checked the both bathrooms. One of them on the first floor and one upstairs. Both of them were empty though. Just then I heard people walking around and talking in my living room downstairs. Then what sounded like Jeffrey calling my name. I heard them coming up the stairs. Jeffrey said something along the lines,
"I just want to talk to you. You can relax."
When I say my heart was racing, that's not an understatement. I actually thought that that night was going to be the night of my death. I quietly shut the bathroom door and locked it. I dialed 911 on my phone and whispered as quietly as I could to the operator to send police right away, or I could be dead within 10 minutes. She wanted me to remain calm and to try my best to explain the situation quietly. After explaining, she told me it was good that I was in a locked room and to wait there until the cops showed up. Footsteps came up to the bathroom door and stopped. Then someone tried the door handle. When they realized it was locked, one of them said in a low voice, "He's in there." I told the operator they found me. She said to stay where I was. After a few seconds of silence on the other end, there was a frighteningly loud bang on the door, and then another, and another, and they were trying to kick the door down. I screamed. The cops were almost here, and the kicking stopped. I heard them whispering to each other, and then I heard them stomping down the stairs. I didn't leave the bathroom until the cops showed up. I was missing a lot of things like my wallet, which was on the kitchen counter, a couple of watches, my iPad, and of course the bike that was in the backyard. The cops told me to just be grateful that I wasn't killed, which I was, but how could I really be happy? After this, the cops said, given that they were trying to break into the bathroom, they were most likely gonna kill me, which scares the hell out of me to think about. That was the one and only time I ever used Craigslist. One night, a father and his daughter were driving down a deserted country road. They were returning home after spending the entire day visiting the girl's mother in hospital. Listening to the sound of the rain drumming on the car roof, the girl began to doze off. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. The father struggled with the steering wheel, but the car skidded off the wet road and slammed into a stone wall. After checking that his daughter was uninjured, the man got out of the car to survey the damage. Both of the front tires had large punctures, and the right fender was crumpled against the wall. The rest of the car had survived unscathed. "We must have driven over something on the road," he explained to his daughter. "Whatever it was, it blew out both of the tires." "You can fix it, right?" asked his daughter, somewhat shaken by the accident. "No," replied her father, shaking his head. "I've only got one spare in the boot. I'll have to walk back into town and find somebody to tow the car," he said. "It isn't that far from here. You wait in the car while I'm gone." "Okay," she said, reluctantly. "But please don't take too long." The man could see in his daughter's eyes that she was frightened. "Sit tight," replied her father. "I'll be back as soon as possible." His daughter watched him in the rearview mirror as he trudged off down the road in the pouring rain and disappeared into the night. More than an hour passed and her father still had not returned. The girl began to wonder what was taking him so long. She was very worried because he should have been back by now. Just then she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure in the distance walking towards the car. At first she thought it was her father, but when she turned around to take a closer look, she realized that it was a strange man. He was dressed in overalls and had a big bushy beard. He was carrying something large in his left hand. Something about him made her very nervous. As he approached, she stared out the back window and squinted her eyes. In the dim light, she could just make out what he was clutching in his right hand. It was a big, sharp butcher's knife. Thinking quickly, the terrified girl locked both the doors in front of the car. When she looked up again, she saw that the strange man seemed to be staring directly at her. Suddenly, the man raised his arm, and the girl let out a blood-curdling scream. In his left hand, he was clutching her father's severed head. She just kept screaming and screaming. She couldn't stop herself. Her heart was pounding and she struggled to breathe. The grotesque expression on her father's face was horrifying to behold. His mouth was hanging open and his eyes were rolled out back in his head. When the man reached the car, he showed his face right up against the window and glowered at her with his crazed eyes. His face was covered in deep scars. For a moment he just stood there, grinning at her like a madman. Then he reached into his pocket, took something out, and slowly lifted his left hand. He was holding her father's car keys.
This happened to me when I was in my junior year of high school when I was 17. I had lived with my uncle because both my parents had gotten a divorce, as my dad was verbally and physically abusive to my mom. My uncle, being the good guy he was, took full custody of me as he nor my mom wanted me to be in an unstable environment. Anyway, I started off my junior year relatively well. I was that typical girl you'd see at lunch with a group of friends that were obsessed with anime. So yes, we were that one nerdy group that would always talk about stuff like that. Sometime during the middle of the school year, our classes were mixed up as this was around the time midterms took place. Because of this, I was now on first lunch instead of second lunch, which all my friends had. That meant that I had to sit alone with no one to talk to for 45 minutes. About a week later, I was sitting alone at a bench eating my lunch when some boy who I'd never seen before came up to me. I'm very shy and insecure when it comes to meeting new people unless I find them easy to talk to. He introduced himself as Kevin. I'd say right away, I started getting weird vibes from him. I don't know what it was, but something about him just made me feel really uneasy. Trying my best to be polite, I introduced my name in a relatively soft tone. He then says in a raspy voice, "So, Angela, what are you into?" I told him my interests by giving him somewhat of a dry response, but I was trying to give him the hint that I wasn't interested. However, rather than taking a step back, he did the exact opposite and took a step forward. "You seem really nice. Can I get your number?" I'm a really nice person, I'm just very socially awkward. I stupidly gave him my number. I then told him that I had to get back to class and that it was nice meeting him and said goodbye. Throughout the day, I tried my best to shake the negative feelings I got from Kevin and focus on the present moment. I told my friends about him and they immediately jumped to jokes talking about how he, quote, must like me and stuff like that. I hated it when they did stuff like that, but hey, that's expected when you hang out with a bunch of groups. That night, I received a text from an unknown number and right away I immediately assumed that it's Kevin, and of course, it was. He texted me hey, and I then did the same. He immediately started talking about his day and how he had received a ton of homework from his teachers. I could relate to this as I'm in the honors program, and any student knows that if you're in the honors program, you get flooded with homework. A few days went by with him texting me about his day, but then his text started to become a little more personal. He started talking about sex and if I liked it. I replied with a firm no and told him that I wasn't interested in talking about stuff like that. He would immediately start apologizing, saying things like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable or anything like that." After he said that, he started to change the subject to something else related to anime, but as time passed, he'd eventually start talking about sex again. I've warned him multiple times and I eventually started to ignore him and his text. However, that only seemed to make the situation worse. He'd sometimes stare at me from a distance at school and leave voicemails on my phone about how pretty I was dressed that day and how he wanted to, quote, make me his. I have no idea how he did it, but he eventually ended up finding my entire class schedule, and I'd occasionally see him peeking through the door to look for me. At this point, I've already blocked him and tried my best to avoid him at all times when I'm at school. Unfortunately, he didn't seem to get the hint and he kept stalking me, whether it be in person or online. I had enough, and my parents and I filed a police report against him, and as far as I know, he had been expelled from school. I ended up learning a couple things about Kevin after he left. He had photos of girls from school posted all over his wall, each of them with their name and the exact date the picture was taken. The creepy thing is that he took the pictures without their knowledge. Now, this is where I felt as if my whole world had fallen apart. Police had discovered a little box of his that had at least 20 photos of a person. That person being me. He had taken photos without my knowledge at lunch, in my class, and even at my bus stop. However, there was one picture that he took of me, sleeping in my bedroom. The creep had been in my house. Police of course arrested him for this, and I never seen him since. I had to get 3 months of therapy after that to help me get through, and I eventually did. I hope I never see Kevin again.